This is my 4th year attending Pulse, and it's absolutely incredible what this has turned into. We have grown, 5x, 6x since the first year. And so just the momentum and the growth of this customer success movement has been absolutely astounding. And so I applaud all of you guys for being part of that movement, for bringing kind of life to this incredible transition that's taking place, and participating in the event that's going on this week. It's really great. So today we are going to talk about a topic called, I want to make sure I get the name right, Delivering World-Class Customer Success at Scale. This is a very timely topic, and it's one that a lot of companies that I work with are wrestling with. And so as these guys are transitioning from relatively small customer success operations, managing dozens or hundreds of customers, where you're kind of doing everything and anything you can to support their needs, to businesses that have thousands or tens of thousands of customers, and how do you manage those customers at scale? How do you segment the customers? How do you figure out what types of services make sense for each one? And there's a lot of different ways to navigate these challenges. The question is, how do you do it well? How do you avoid the pitfalls? How do you ultimately kind of scale these customer success organizations to handle the thousands of tens of thousands of customers that all of us ultimately aspire to have? We have an awesome panel today to discuss the topic. I'm going to ask the panelists to come out right now. We've got Scott Romiser from Citrix, John Hernstein from Box, and Brett Jarvis from LinkedIn. So guys, come sit down here. And just a note on kind of timing and logistics here. We'll be chatting up here for 25, 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for some Q&A. So please keep some questions in mind, and there'll be runners around the floor that are be able to bring you a microphone so you can ask our esteemed guests up here any questions that you have. So to get things kicked off on a lighter note, I'd like to ask each of the panelists, what is one fact that would surprise the audience? One fact about each of you that we wouldn't naturally know or would surprise folks. Who wants to take it?
I'll take it first. The Panther yesterday, that was me dancing. Not really.
Yeah.
We can lie in this?
Absolutely. Lying's actually
One
better.
surprising lie.
Yeah,
So
lying is better.
So I'm from Box. My team's here, so this may surprise all of you. Thank you. I manage a team of about 200 people at Box. I talk to customers all the time. I probably spend 90% of my day just talking to people, and I'm a massive introvert. So that's probably the most surprising thing about me. Introvert. Yeah.
Excellent.
Don't look me in the eye.
Okay. I'll try not to. My surprising fact is that for the last 4 years, I have danced in the Nutcracker Ballet during Christmas season.
Wow,
So,
that's great.
There you go.
Yeah, we go every year.
I should say performed more than danced.
Dancing is overstating
Very minimal dancing.
Yeah. Well, hey guys, I actually did this backwards. I should have asked, spend 30 seconds just talking about kind of your background, your role at your various companies, and what does customer success mean? I think that'll give the audience context for some of the questions we're going to go into in a minute.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. I work at Citrix in the Mobility Apps Business Unit division. So it's about a $750 million division right now, about 1,700 employees in our group. We'll be spun off later this year as a standalone publicly traded company. But I run the customer success team there, which is about 270 to 280 people globally. And we're responsible for customer care, so all of our technical support and customer success. And I started off at Citrix about 13 years ago in a sales and care operations role, really focusing on the back office and the systems, and just about 2 years ago took over the customer care, customer success role. Largely, we focus on helping our customers get value from our services by helping them drive the outcomes for their business. It's really simple. That's an overarching kind of premises that everything we do, we try to align around that and deliver on that.
Yep, so John Hernstein from Box. I've been with Box almost 5 years, actually 5 years this month. And I first learned about customer success at the same time I joined Box. So my whole career prior to that, about 20 years, was in professional services, primarily for software companies. And at Box, I've got responsibility for our consulting team, our CSMs, our customer advisory team, and support team, which we call user services. So that's me.
And Brett Jarvis at LinkedIn. And at LinkedIn, I lead customer success for small business globally. and leading a team of customer success managers, and also working within the company around the strategy of how to work with our smaller customers. And for the last 14 years or so, I've had a variety of different positions in the post-sales world at Oracle and Salesforce, including things like strategy and ops and product management for services and leading support teams, organizations, et cetera. So, and I'm delighted to be here.
Awesome. All right, thanks, guys. So, you guys are leading customer success operations at businesses that have achieved scale. And so you are confronting and managing a lot of the problems that a lot of people in the audience are kind of aspiring to get to over time. So walk us through, how do you guys segment your customers today? How do you think about the different service offerings you can make available to those segments? People use different language. There's pooled CSMs, there's dedicated CSMs. And so walk us through kind of the segmentation you guys have done, and then kind of how you manage the services to those different segments.
Yeah, I think before I talk about the segments a little, I think what's really important is that you look to scale, and I want to make sure that this gets out there early. As you look to scale your organization and how you're working with customers, make sure that you're scaling intelligently. There are a lot of things that you can do to scale, but when you can provide knowledge management, you can provide training online, et cetera, but you got to make sure that you know what it is that you're doing that actually has an impact on the customer. And when you do that, when you know that, then you can know how to scale and make sure you never lose that. And so when we have different segments, we do have an online automated segment where we have looked at the customers that, from historical experience, we know that they're not necessarily going to renew any differently no matter what we do as human beings with them. And there are also smaller customers that are paying us less, but are smaller as well as companies, and so we know we'll never grow too much. Mm-hmm. And so then we have different levels of engagement based on whether it's a small customer that is paying us a little more than the others and can grow. We have high growth segments, we have enterprise segments, et cetera, all based on their spend with us and how much we think that they can grow moving forward.
And in some, do you take a leap of faith with some, where it's obviously a Fortune 1000 company that has the capability of spending a lot, but they may not be spending much today? How do you thread that needle?
Yeah, so we have a segment that we call high growth that would fall, those types of companies would fall into that category.
Okay, great. John, how does Box, or Scott, either way?
Yeah, so I think Box is a little bit unique in that we started as a freemium business that is now very much focused on the enterprise. So what's kind of interesting, cool, and a little bit difficult about Box is we have customers everywhere from the personal user who pays us nothing all the way up to pretty large seven-figure customers like GE and Schneider Electric that we talk about pretty publicly. And I think the trick for us from a customer success perspective is figuring out how do you serve GE really well, but then also provide really great support for the personal user who one day could become a business, paying business user. And what we've tried to do is sort of figure out how to take the best of a highly managed account and what you learn from CSMs managing a small set of accounts, take the best practices from that and sort of push it down. But at the same time, what do you learn from the small customers and how to serve them at scale and efficiently and actually bring that up, right, and sort of meet in the middle. And so what we do today is we segment primarily based on the size of the customer. To align with our sales teams. We have field customers and commercial customers. But then we also assign CSMs based on the number of seats that they purchase from us. So it has more to do with the complexity of the deployment than it has to do with the size of the customer. So we could have a customer that's too small to get a CSM that's really a really big company, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And we just sort of make those assignments based on that.
How do you, the question I asked Brett, I'll ask you the same one. How do you navigate the situation where it's a very large company, but still is a very small customer today? Because their experience with Box during that process may dictate how big they can ultimately become. So how do you navigate that situation?
Yeah, so we do it sort of on an exception basis now. Today, our threshold is 100 seats. We purchase 100 seats. You have a named CSM. I hate the term dedicated CSM because I think it gives the wrong impression of the customer. We don't literally have dedicated CSMs today. But for customers who are below 100 seats but very high potential, the sales team will often just ask for an exception and say, we'd like to assign a CSM. Here's why. And then we sort of go from there. But I think what's really important to understand in our world, and yours too, if you have CSMs and non-CSM managed accounts, is you don't want to give people the impression that, well, if you don't have a CSM, you're just getting nothing. And I think that's the important part of what happens below there is it's very programmatic, it's very scaled, it's very high quality. The customer has a great experience. So it's not you either get a CSM or you get nothing. You get a CSM managed account or what we call customer advisor managed account.
I just want to pick up on a couple of points that John said. Sorry, Scott. The one is the bringing stuff down from the high level to across the segments, and the other is from the lower level, lower segments, scaling that. That's very important. But two is the point that you just made, which is the that you make sure you talk about the benefits with customers, and not that you're going to get a person, because over time your segments will shift, and what you can apply to as with CSM resources to the different segments will change. And so you want to make sure that you're communicating the benefits you're getting through scaled things, and rather than just talking about, hey, we're going to throw a person at you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing I would just want to pile on is on what John said. As you think about what you do at the low end, and if you do it really, really well, that should apply to every customer of every size all the way up. And I would argue in some cases that that's a better customer experience. Take the person out of it. Always there, always available. They don't need to wait for you to call them back, or they don't need to hope that you're not on another call. So whatever you do on the low end, it's highly it's a highly personalized, customized, and a great experience that actually should address all levels. The only other lens that I'll throw in that we're looking at Citrix a little bit is we're taking two lenses in how we structure our team and how do we segment our customers, in addition to what you've already heard. One lens, and these are tests that aren't yet fully baked out, but one lens is kind of understanding the potential share of wallet, the potential of an account, and working with sales to come up with some sort of algorithm that says this should be a $100,000 account even though they're only spending 15, and applying the right CSM resources to that opportunity. We've ran a test that showed some really promising results against a control group, and so we're going to test that a little bit more and figure out if there's more we should be doing there. And then the second thing is we're looking at the customer life cycle and trying to figure out where do we apply our resources through that customer life cycle. And probably no surprise to anyone in this room, we have a strong premise that the early life, what we call the enablement phase, which we define internally as day 0 to day 90, is the most critical part of the customer life cycle. If we get that right, everything else downstream, 12 months later, 24 months later, 36 months later, it's cheaper, it's easier, and you actually don't have to apply as much resource and cost against that. And so we're going to be heavily weighting our resources towards that segment of the customer life cycle, which we call enablement internally.
Yeah, we've actually seen something similar. We surveyed a bunch of our portfolio companies about some of the leading indicators of churn, 6 months later, 9 months later, and a lot of it always goes back to that first 90 days. And was that initial deployment fast, a quick time to ROI, and if you do that, the likelihood of them actually renewing or upselling, later that year is much higher. So do you guys remember, just out of curiosity, when did you realize that you needed to go through this segmentation exercise? Was there a point in time where this is breaking, it doesn't work anymore, hair on fire, and was it, when you got to 1,000 customers or 100 million of ARR, or, is there some milestone where it's kind of like the systems just stop working, the everybody gets everything model to, okay, we have to start segmenting that, people should be looking out on the horizon for?
Our segmentation started many, many years ago, at least in our larger, what we call corporate accounts. And it was largely driven by sales in saying, I've sold this customer and I'm getting burdened with all of this activity. Can you guys help? And it was an ask to the support team at the time. And this is probably about 10 years ago. And so what we started to do was build out what we called at the time a key account management team, which we now call CRMs. And then we started to create some differentiating there. But it was largely sales driven, based upon customer need.
So when I joined Box about 5 years ago, we were about a $25 million ARR kind of new bookings business, and a $50,000 customer would be one of our top 5 at that point. And we were already pretty creaky from a CSM perspective, because in those days the model was basically sales would close the deal and then throw everything over the wall to the CSM. We had a different name for it then. And they were sort of doing everything. And when I was interviewing, I was talking to someone who was in the organization. I said, how many accounts do you each have? And it was something like 5,000. And I didn't even understand what that meant. What do you do with 5,000 customers? It doesn't make any sense. And fairly quickly, we moved to a model where we put in place a threshold. We've now raised the threshold twice since I joined. And I do think it's one of the things that SaaS companies sort of have to do naturally over time as your customer base grows. You have to keep raising that threshold. And the trick is, again, not to raise the threshold and leave all those customers below the threshold sort of behind and in the dust, but actually provide really great programmatic experience for them so that they can get the help that they need.
Yeah, so I've only been at LinkedIn for a year and a half, but I would echo what John is saying about constantly evolving, like I was saying earlier. And so we will constantly evolve. We have been evolving for the year and a half that I've been there. And to the point about making sure that you've got good programs, when people talk about scale, often internally you'll say, well, I don't want to leave my customer behind, to John's point. And I always talk about ATMs, which now I should probably update my analogy to talk about online banking. But when ATMs came around, no one said, oh my goodness, I don't get to talk to the teller and wait in line for the teller anymore. Everybody was happy about it. The banks were happy, we're happy. Same with online banking. Banks are happy, we're happy. That's the type of thing we're striving for when we scale, is something that the customers will be excited about, because to Scott's point, it's on 24/7. They'll be able to leverage whenever they want, and we'll be able to scale more.
Yeah. To talk a little bit about, as you guys have gone through this journey, what are some of the most effective levers that you've used to increase the efficiency of kind of the customer success team in aggregate, and then the customer success operator, the actual kind of professional, out in the field, trying to serve those accounts? What are some of those key levers that been successful for you guys? Scott, you want to go for it?
Sure. Probably the biggest lever that I've seen, so one, clearly systems. You have to have systems that people can use. One system that incorporates in the various different data feeds that you have in your business. And so putting the right energy and effort and focus behind that, I think, is really important. And that more speaks to the CSM's effectiveness and efficiency. From an overall customer success strategy within our business, there are probably two things that are most important. One is strong partnerships across the entire organization around understanding everyone has a role in customer success. And then the second one is around data and the right insights. And we've invested a lot in the last 18 months on data and insights. And I think if you ask any of my team that's sitting up front here, they would tell you the data that they have access to today versus what they had 2 years ago is vastly, vastly different. In terms of real time and how they get it and how it's fed to them. And so I think, and that data is not just used by the CSM team, it's used by the sales team, it's used by the product team, it's used by the marketing team. It's pervasive across the organization. So it's really a data-led, insight-led strategy, so we know we're taking the right actions across the business, across all departments.
I'd echo as well the tying with other organizations. I'd say the biggest lever for scaling customer success is product. And if you're working closely with product, or even if product figures it out without you, if they make a product that is simpler, more engaging, stickier, then the whole company wins. And that is massive, and having that relationship is really important. And if you come to them understanding what their objectives are, and understanding that when you come to them, it's not going to be just about you whining to help your needs, but you're going to actually say, hey, this is how you can meet your objectives better, and we can give you input and let you do what you do really well, then that will help. And right next to that would be working with marketing. For example, we've got a great content marketing, relationship marketing team at LinkedIn, and working with them to be able to leverage the best practices that we provide and the data that Scott was talking about, to be able to engage with customers and the like. So those are using that in addition to systems, et cetera, but working with the other organizations and having the whole company be bought into making our customers actually successful is the biggest lever. And then for individuals, I would say making sure that you cut out the noise. CSMs can be a dumping ground for the world unless you have a clear objective. And unless you state that objective with everybody else and get the organization, sales, et cetera, bought into what you're trying to accomplish, and that you're there to help the customer. And but you need to make sure that you have clear priorities and that your team does not become a dumping ground. And then if you have clear priorities and you have clear metrics for simple metrics that they can align to, that helps them scale as well.
I'll add in one thing there around having clear responsibilities defined internally. I think the other element that we've seen is also really communicating that to your customers during the onboarding process, letting them know where to go to get the right support. You know, we don't want their CSM to be the single point of contact for that customer into the business. We have a 24/7 support team that's available for them. They serve a number of different functions. There are things they can get in the product or off of the website. So we make sure as part of the onboarding, we're pointing customers to that stuff as well.
Yeah, so I think these guys are right, and I would sort of echo all of that. Maybe add to it that we think of customer success, you know, ideally as a very integrated set of things and kind of forces that we apply to the customer. So everything from the onboarding process that our consulting team drives to admin and end user education, our community site, all that falls under the umbrella of customer success. And I think applying those all sort of equally to the customer is a kind of a real force multiplier for us.
Yeah, I mean, just building on some of these points, and Brett, I'll hand it back to you in a second. You know, the companies I work with, one really interesting thing I would note is the healthiest companies I work with tend to lead with customer success. They recognize from the CEO down that it's really the heartbeat of the company, and that they're the ones that have the clearest sense about the health of the business, what's going on. They feed data into product, to your point, Brett, about, you know, really having a close relationship with product, because they're closest to it. I mean, they're dealing with the customers who are living in that product day in, day out. And then interestingly, we're doing some work on this now, but the companies across our portfolio that have the highest NPS scores also have the most efficient sales organizations. And so there is this clear causal relationship that if you're investing in customer success and you have high NPS scores, you tend to have a much more efficient sales organization, which makes all the sense in the world because there's this halo effect. People are saying good things about the product, they're having a good experience. The sales guys are able to leverage that and, you know, benefit from the work that you guys are doing. So that also is a force multiplier, John, to your point.
Right. I was going to add that I hear a lot in conferences like this, and including in this one, about working with sales and making sure that they're selling the right things and making sure handoffs are right. And we work on all that as well, of course. And it will always be a work in progress because sales teams change. And but we work on the handoffs, et cetera. But one other thing that we've done at LinkedIn is we've got a really insightful sales ops team, and they've looked at the types of customers that we sell to that never are successful or that are rarely successful. And they've taken those out of the hunters' books, so they're not even going to try to sell to them. And we've seen some impact with that already since they've done that over the last year.
Yeah, that's a key part of the segmenting exercise, which is actually who can be successful and eliminating, you know, that whole cohort of customers from the sales process from the get-go. That makes everybody that makes the company healthier long term. So John, a few minutes ago, you mentioned a ratio, you know, between kind of CSMs and customers, and it was totally out of whack when you joined Box, and you've kind of rationalized it. How do you guys think about these ratios? Should it be a CSM to a number of accounts? Should it be based on the revenue that CSM is accountable for? What's the right way to think about that allocation of CSM resources to customers or revenue, and how do you guys reconcile that?
So the honest answer is I don't know. And I'd say from a ratio perspective, you're never really where you want to be. I think you could always get better. And I think your CSMs will always feel like, gosh, if I could only spend more time with this customer, the outcome would be better. Maybe to the point where you could, you know, if you could afford to do one-to-one, you would do it. I think it depends on your product and adoption and everything else. You know, today, probably shouldn't say exactly what our ratios are, but our ratios vary by segment and kind of value of the customer. We do it based on number of customers as opposed to ARR, but we do occasionally sort of double check against the ARR to see, you know, that it's rational. But you're constantly sort of working internally to justify better and better ratios. And one of the things that we're doing right now actually is a little bit of a pilot, more than an experiment, less than kind of full GA, for something we call key accounts, which is basically giving a small set of CSMs a much smaller customer ratio. But then I think also very, very importantly, a much smaller CSM to sales rep ratio. Because one of the challenges we have today is that a CSM could be working with any one of 20 or 30 different AEs, depending on how many accounts they have, and you never really get into that relationship and cadence with the AE around talking about account strategy and retention and renewal and expansion strategy. So we're experimenting with this with 4 CSMs fairly soon here. We've got 3, adding one more. And the idea is if we can demonstrate the ROI by going to that much leaner kind of account ratio, then we'll go back and say, now let's do this more broadly across the CSM team.
Any early data on the experiment in terms of how it's performing?
Yeah, so we're 1 quarter in, so the first quarter data is not really meaningful at all. I think retention rates look pretty much where the rest of the field does. But what's interesting is the anecdotal data is super interesting, right? The feedback we're getting from the AEs, from the CSMs, and then even interestingly from the customers. I got a couple of unsolicited emails from customers saying, the time I was just able to spend with my CSM was so helpful to me in thinking about Box and how it fits into my business and how it can help me solve problems in a way that they'd never had that interaction before.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I'll build on that real quickly, just on a test that we ran to put some numbers behind the test you're running. When we went down and applied kind of a higher touch model to our, call it our mid-tier, we were able to drive a 6-point improvement in NPS in a 6-month period, and we're able to drive $250,000 in incremental annualized sales. So it definitely does work, and you do get repaid for your additional effort there. But you have to make sure you're targeting the right customers.
Yeah. Brett?
Yeah, well, I think the main thing that we're hearing is that, to your first point, none of us know, right? And we're all testing. We're testing as well. Have a variety of different approaches. And the one thing that was insightful as well that John was talking about, I won't add much, but the comment about working with sales, and we've tried to limit that and focus on one-to-one or one-to-a-few salespeople, so they can really strengthen those relationships and then have those relationships with the customers. Because one of the other things we heard a couple of years ago from our customers was we were changing the people who are managing the relationship with the customers way too often. And so we've really worked on changing that, so we will keep the salesperson as best as possible with the customer. Even if they've grown and would have grown out of one of our segments, we'll keep them in there for a while.
Yeah.
And where we can't do that, we'll keep the CSM associated with them. So anyway, that's really important. The rest, I couldn't add anything.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, again, my own anecdotal experience with a couple of my portfolio companies that went through kind of this enterprise segmentation exercise, similar to what you're doing, John, was 3-4 quarters in when they picked their top 20% of their accounts, which was usually 50% or more of the revenue. NPS scores more than doubled because they had a much more focused support organization on them. Upsell rates, renewals all increased substantially. It goes back to this connection between NPS, upsells, renewals, sales efficiency, and we saw it in spades. So in 1 minute, I'm going to ask the audience for questions. I've got one additional question for you guys first, though. How do you guys manage morale in your organizations? Because a lot of times the customers aren't happy, and it's a hard job. And I had a really interesting discussion with Allison Pickens from Gainsight a couple of evenings ago about this exact topic, because somebody that doesn't have the right morale or is not a good kind of doesn't have a good attitude about the business can be a real virus for the customers, and that kind of seeps into the customer's experience with the company. How do you guys kind of see that issue? How do you root it out? How do you address it?
Yeah, I think with morale, you want to be managing it all way before anybody gets to that point, as best as possible. I had this interesting conversation with a sales leader where she was saying expressing concerns about our team, and then I talked with her about stuff, and she was like, "Oh, I love your team. You guys are doing great." But I talk about continuous improvement all the time with my sales team. And I said, "Oh, yeah, okay, I get that. But you got to understand that in the CSM world, our CSMs are dealing with difficult customers all the time. In the sales world, every time you do anything close to right, it gets celebrated, right? And so in the CSM world, that's not true. They're having difficult conversations all the time. And so we try to build them up and to celebrate them, and not nitpick and manage every little detail and why did this go wrong, why did that go wrong, but give them an objective, make sure they're bought into the objective, and then give them some leeway to manage their accounts the way that they see fit, as long as they're working toward that objective. And then if we have the case of somebody who's causing problems or has morale issues, then we're going to work with them and put them on a plan and work through with them if we need to.
John or Scott, anything to add?
Yeah, so it's a complicated topic because it's a very, very difficult job, as you say. And even if you're not dealing with difficult customers, it's still a hard job, right? It's just there's a constant stream of work that needs to get done. I think it's important to kind of think about it proactively from a performance management perspective. If you've got someone who's not kind of sort of the what you do and the how you do it. We focus a lot on the how. I think we focus a lot on the notion of these are roles, a lot of them that are really kind of starter roles or kind of mid-career roles where you kind of use it as a base for doing something else. And so the focus on career mobility into other roles, more senior roles, both in CS and elsewhere in the company is pretty important because you can show people a path for like, this is what you're doing today, it's tough, but here's what you could be doing by building these skills. And I think the recognition piece is really important too. And I think it's important that it doesn't just come from the head of customer success. Because I think we all know what an awesome job our teams do, but what they want to hear is that the rest of the company agrees with that. And I remember early days at Box going to the head of sales where the win notifications would go out, and it was always shout outs to the sales team and the SE and everyone else who supported the deal, legal even. It's like, well, what about customer success? And I have to go ask deal by deal for that recognition. Today, if you look at our win notifications, there's always someone or multiple people from the CS organization who are being called out by the rep for helping get the deal done.
That's great.
I think they really touched on all of it. We focus on recognition and rewards, so really, incentivizing and recognizing the right behaviors. It's a commitment to career mobility. I know in our business, our organization has the largest mobility of people being promoted and transferred into other teams. I think the last 2 years we hit over 20% it's probably closer to 23, 24% every year of people taking on a new role and a new responsibility. And the other thing we do is we try to create this, while the job does get monotonous and you are dealing with customers, we actually do a lot of internal project work, and we try to get people involved in projects that have a really meaningful impact, where we identify big opportunities. And so getting them involved in those projects and in work streams and being able to contribute and interact with broader set of employees across different functional areas to solve a problem really is invigorating and gets them engaged. And so we focus a lot on that. And then one last point is we have NPS measures down to every care interaction, assuming the customer responds to the survey around every individual. And that's a core part of our one-on-ones every week when we run one-on-ones with our team. We review the customer feedback and the verbatims, and we use it as a coaching opportunity and a development opportunity if one applies.
Yeah, and around the mobility side, it's important that they see it, as you guys are saying, that they see it actually in practice, that it's happening. And then it's important that those people who are moving on to other roles are really successful in those roles, and that you tout that, and that you talk that. And so we work with our teams to make sure that they are going to be successful when they move on, and make sure that the work that they're doing here will build for the future too. Great.
Great. So with that, I want to open it up to the audience for questions. There should be some runners around there. I see a hand up in the front here. We'll go with that. Wow, that's a big microphone.
I feel a little silly. I have a question, just what metrics you use to measure your CSMs?
The metrics we use the primary metric we use is NPS, because we believe that is, we're responsible for delivering the great customer experience, and then the advocacy that comes out of that, we believe is kind of the Uber metric, let's say. Underneath that, we look at things like time to value, usage rates, and things like that, and customer health scores. That are all, we like to think of those as leading indicators to retention. We used to goal our teams on retention, whether it's gross retention or net retention, but we don't anymore because we feel like those are lagging indicators, and it drove the wrong focus and wrong behavior. So we try to focus on the leading indicators as much as we can.
Okay.
So we actually do focus on retention, and that's what we pay people on. They're variable. And the things underneath for us are customer outreach and our customer success plans, usage, things like that. The reason we focus on retention still is, even though it is a lagging indicator, we think of it as an objective, because if you're thinking about retention, you're going to think about your relationship with the customer in a different way than if you're just thinking about usage. So you will start doing things like, in the small business world especially, but everywhere, champions will leave, they'll move on. So we should plan for that. And so we should make sure that the CSMs know multiple people at the customer and that they've worked in multiple relationships, things like that.
So we have 4 primary sort of categories of metric: customer satisfaction, adoption, retention, and expansion, and there's sort of sub-metrics within those. So we're sort of looking at those primarily as output metrics. You're right, there's a lot that goes into it in terms of activity and all that, but we focus mainly on the output.
Is there another question out in the audience? Oh, there's a few more. Sure, over there.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Annie Wu with MindBody. So I'm overseeing customer service, which includes the success team. My question is, how do I influence marketing and sales to come along on this journey? Because it is a little disruptive to how they've been doing things.
So I'll get really tactical real quickly, if that would help. So from a sales standpoint, we focused a lot on the initial handoff and understanding why did the customer purchase. So when we're onboarding them, we can really hit on the outcomes that they're trying to drive. It allows us to create that real tight connection point. We also believe that if we get customers off on the right foot, they add on sooner and they'll retain, which the sales reps benefit from. So we really focus on that. And we went so far, I had approached the VP of sales and worked with her on putting a metric in place so sales is paid on the handoff and then the adoption and use of the products at day 90. So we're completely aligned there. On marketing, we have a great partnership with marketing, and we really unlocked a partnership with marketing when we did something a little bit unique and embedded a product manager in marketing to take on driving engagement and enablement programs. From my experience, is the product manager had a different lens. They understood what you can do within the product, and they thought a little bit more broadly than kind of campaigns and more nurturing or drip campaigns. And it really unlocked the potential of getting us to work together. So it was getting the right person in the role, and then having some shared goals as well. Shared goals went a long way for us.
I'd say when working with sales or any organization, cross-organization, you have to understand what's in it for them, and especially with sales. But like, what's in it for them? What are they going to get out of it? And to Scott's point, they're going to get a lot out of it. And there's a lot of data in the industry. Gainsight has a lot of data where you can tout that and talk about that. And similar with marketing, although if marketing is only about lead gen, that discussion becomes a little more difficult. If they get the sense of relationship marketing, then you can be golden.
Anything you want to add, John?
I would just say do really good work with your customers and bring those stories back into the company. We use the term voice of the customer, but I think CS, we always think about our responsibility to the customer primarily, but I think you should also think about our responsibility to the company. Your people in the customer success function are the people, along with sales, spending the most time talking directly with customers. And the more you bring that in and go to sales and say, here's what's working and not working, when you position the product that way, or from a marketing perspective, the more you can bring that knowledge and intelligence into the company, I think the more influential your organization will be.
Great. So unfortunately, we have the red light blinking here, which means we're out of time. If it's okay with the panelists, I'm going to try and summarize some of the key takeaways. Is that all right? So just a couple of things just to make this actionable and provide you guys with a cheat sheet. Number one is going through this segmentation exercise. It will set you free, and it will allow you to really understand your customers in a very nuanced way. Averages are very misleading, and so really segmenting your customers into the right tiers makes a lot of sense. Number two, actually I lost my slide here, but I'll try and remember it. Experiment. Test a lot of things and see what actually works. And thank you. And as it works, start to scale it and build on it. But there should be a culture of experimentation so that you're constantly trying to learn what types of interaction models and support models work well for your different segments of customers. Number three is get your arms around the data and the tools you need to actually test these things, run it, so you have a baseline of knowledge. Gainsight happens to be a great product to do this. I'm obviously biased, but I would certainly start there, because without that data, it's very hard to make informed decisions on how you're going to continue to iterate and improving. And then finally is motivation. We talked a little bit about this kind of morale issue and culture issue. There's things you can do to obviously manage your teams, and things I think to get more visibility across the company. The thing I mentioned before, this notion that's correlating high NPS scores with sales efficiency, really look into that. It's not an accident, and there's real data out there that will show this. And I think the more points that you can prove showing investments in customer success, drive higher NPS scores, drive more sales efficiency, you're going to have a lot more kind of visibility, a lot more success, and a lot more kind of awareness, throughout the company. It'll be on everybody's radar screen. So with that, I really want to thank the panelists. You guys did an awesome job, and everybody have a great time at Pulse.